at first, and then more and more merrily and heartily they started singing, dancing, and playing Christmas games. The Countess, when she had identified them and laughed at their costumes, went into the drawing room. The Count sat at the ballroom, smiling radiantly and applauding the players. The young people had disappeared. Half an hour later there appeared among the other mummers in the ballroom an old lady in a hoop skirt. This was Nicholas. A Turkish girl. This was Petya. A clown was Dimla. A hussar was Natasha. And a Circassian was Sonia, with burnt cork moustache and eyebrows. After the condescending surprise and non-recognition and praise from those who were not themselves dressed up, the young people decided that their costumes were so good that they ought to be shown elsewhere. Nicholas, who, as the roads were in splendid condition, wanted to take them all for a drive in his troika, proposed to take with them about a dozen of the serf mummers and drive to Uncle's. "No, why disturb the fellow?" said the Countess. "Besides, you wouldn't have room to turn around there. If you must go, go to the Melyukovs." Melyukova was a widow who, with her family and their tutors and governesses, lived 3 miles from the Rostovs. "That's right, my dear," chimed in the old Count, thoroughly aroused. "I'll dress up at once and go with them. I'll make Pasheta open her eyes." But the Countess would not agree to his going. He had had a bad leg all these days. It was decided that the Count must not go, but that if Louisa Ivanovna, Madame Schoss, would go with them, the young ladies might go to the Melyukovs. Sonia, generally so timid and shy, more urgently than anyone begging Louisa Ivanovna not to refuse. Sonia's costume was the best of all. Her moustache and eyebrows were extraordinarily becoming. Everyone told her she looked very handsome, and she was in a spirited and energetic mood unusual with her. Some inner voice told her that now or never her fate would be decided, and in her male attire she seemed quite a different person. Louisa Ivanovna consented to go, and in half an hour 4 troika sleighs with large and small bells, their runners squeaking and whistling over the frozen snow, drove up to the porch. Natasha was the foremost in setting the merry holiday tone, which, passing from one to another, grew stronger and reached its climax when they all came out into the frost and got into the sleighs, talking and calling to one another, laughing and shouting. 2 of the troikas were the usual household sleighs, and the third was the old Count's with a trotter from the Orlov stud at the shaft horse, and the 4th was Nicholas's own with a short, shaggy black shaft horse. Nicholas, in his old lady's dress, over which he had belted his hussar coat, stood in the middle of the sleigh, reins in hand. It was so light that he could see the moonlight reflected from the metal harness discs and from the eyes of the horses, who looked around in alarm at the noisy party under the shadow of the porch roof. Natasha, Sonia, Madame Schoss, and 2 maids got into Nicholas's sleigh, Dimla, his wife, and Petya into the old Count's, and the rest of the mummers seated themselves in the other 2 sleighs. "You go ahead, Zakhar!" shouted Nicholas to his father's coachman, wishing for a chance to race past him. The old Count's troika, with Dimla and his party, started forward, squeaking on its runners, as though freezing to the snow, its deep-toned bell clanging. The side horses, pressing against the shafts of the middle horses, sank in the snow, which was dry and glittering like sugar, and threw it up. Nicholas set off, following the first sleigh, moved noisily, their runners squeaking. At first they drove at a steady trot along the narrow road. While they drove past the garden, the shadows of the bare trees often fell across the road and hid the brilliant moonlight, but as soon as they were past the fence, the snowy plain bathed in moonlight, and motionless spread out before them, glittering like diamonds and dappled with bluish shadows. Bang, bang went the first sleigh over a cradle hole in the snow of the road, and each of the other sleighs jolted in the same way. And rudely breaking the frost-bound stillness, the troikas began to speed along the road, one after the other. "A hare's track! A lot of tracks!" rang out Natásha's voice through the frost-bound air. "How light it is, Nicholas!" came Sónya's voice. Nicholas glanced around at Sónya and bent over to see her face closer. Quite a new, sweet face, with black eyebrows and moustaches, peeped up at him from her sable furs, so close and yet so distant in the moonlight. That used to be Sónya, he thought, and he looked at her closer and smiled. "What is it, Nicholas?" "Nothing," he said, and turned again to the horses. When they came out onto the beaten highroad, polished by sleigh runners and cut up by rough-shod hoofs, the marks of which were visible in the moonlight, the horses began to tug at the reins of their own accord and increased their pace. The near side horse, arching his head and breaking into a short canter, tugged at his traces. The shaft horse swayed from side to side, moving his ears as if asking, "Isn't it time to begin now?" In front, already far ahead, the deep bell of the sleigh ringing farther and farther off, the black horses, driven by Zakhar, could clearly be seen against the white snow. From that sleigh one could hear shouts, laughter, and voices of the mummers. "Gee up, my darlings!" shouted Nicholas, pulling the reins to one side and flourishing the whip. It was only by the keener wind that met them and the jerks given by the side horses who pulled harder, ever increasing their gallop, that one noticed how fast the troika was flying. Nicholas looked back. With screams, squeals, and waving of whips that caused even the shaft horses to gallop, the other sleighs followed. The shaft horse swung steadily beneath the bow over its head, with no thought of slackening pace, and ready to put on speed when required. Nicholas overtook the first sleigh. They were driving downhill and coming out on a broad trodden track across a meadow near a river. "Where are we thought. "This is Kossoy Meadow, I suppose, but no, this is something new I've never seen before. Isn't Kossoy Meadow nor the Demkin Hill? And heaven only knows what it is. It is something new and enchanted. Well, whatever it may be," and shouting to his horses, he began to pass the first sleigh. Zakhar held back his horses and turned his face, which was already covered with hoarfrost, to his eyebrows. Nicholas gave the horses the rein, and Zakhar, stretching out his arms, clucked his tongue and let his horses go. "Now look out, master!" he cried. Faster still the two troikas flew side by side, and faster moved the feet of the galloping side horses. Nicholas began to draw ahead. Zakhar, while still keeping his arms extended, raised one hand with the reins. "No, you won't, master!" he shouted. Nicholas put all his horses to a gallop and passed Zakhar. The horses showered with fine dry snow on the faces of those in the sleigh. Besides them sounded quick ringing bells, and they caught confusing glimpses of swiftly moving legs and the shadows of the troika they were passing. The whistling sounds of the runners on the snow and the voices of girls shrieking were heard from the different sides. Checking again his horses, Nicholas looked around him. They were still surrounded by the magical plain bathed in moonlight and spangled with stars. "The car is shouting that I should turn to the left, but why to the left?" thought Nicholas. "Aren't we getting to the Melyukovs? Is this Melyukovka? Heaven only knows where we're going, and heaven knows what is happening to us, but it is very strange and pleasant, whatever it is." He looked around the sleigh. "Look, his moustache and eyelashes are all white," said one of the strange, pretty, unfamiliar people, the one with fine eyebrows and a moustache. "I think this used to be Natásha," thought Nicholas, "and that was Madame Schoss, but perhaps it is not, and this Circassian with the moustache, I don't know, but I love her." "Aren't you cold?" he asked. They did not answer, but began to laugh. Dimmler from the sleigh behind shouted something, probably something funny, but they could not make out what it was. "Yes, yes," some voices answered, laughing. But here was a fairy forest with black moving shadows and a glitter of diamonds and a flight of marble steps and the silver roofs of fairy buildings and the shrill yells of some animals. And if this really is Melyukovka, it is still stranger that we drove